The situation unfolding across the Western Hemisphere in late 2025 represents one of the most consequential strategic tensions in decades, with real-world military deployments, airspace disputes, economic disruption, and political fault lines intersecting in a manner that could reshape regional security architecture. It began publicly with statements by U.S. leadership asserting that airspace in and around Venezuelan sovereign territory should be considered closed in its entirety, a declaration lacking basis in international law, but which nonetheless triggered immediate practical and diplomatic consequences. This assertion, repeated in official advisories, was anchored in the broader context of an expansive U.S. counter-narcotics campaign in the Caribbean and nearby maritime zones, a campaign that has since drawn intense scrutiny, criticism, and geopolitical pushback from governments across Latin America. The assertion of airspace closure effectively grounded many international flights over Venezuelan skies, with carriers, including major Latin American and European airlines, canceling routes or rerouting around the airspace to mitigate perceived risks. These commercial responses have in practice created a de facto closure despite the absence of any formal declaration by Venezuela itself or any consensus in international aviation governance. The practical outcome has been immediate and profound. Air corridors that once connected northern South America to global hubs have become convoluted, lengthening flight paths, increasing fuel costs, and isolating parts of a nation already beleaguered by economic crisis. In parallel, the U.S. Navy and Air Force have surged assets into the Caribbean basin. Multiple Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers equipped with Aegis combat systems are now arrayed off the Venezuelan littoral, their SPY-1 radar suites scanning the maritime approaches for suspicious contacts. These warships, whose Mk-41 vertical launch systems can fire Standard missiles for air defense and Tomahawk cruise missiles for precision strike, operate alongside P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft and MQ-9 Reaper drones flown from forward bases. Beyond surface combatants and reconnaissance aircraft, U.S. Army and Marine Corps aviation assets, including CV-22B Ospreys and CH-53K heavy-lift helicopters, have been repositioned to joint bases in Puerto Rico and other Caribbean installations, indicating preparation for rapid deployment and contingency operations. The scale of this repositioning signifies more than routine patrol. It reflects a strategy of layered presence that blends conventional power projection with specialized counter-smuggling missions. The composition of these deployments suggests that commanders are preparing for a wide spectrum of contingencies, from interdiction and boarding operations at sea to humanitarian assistance missions should the humanitarian situation in Venezuela deteriorate further. The airspace warnings compounded this military presence into a broader strategic narrative. Under the 1944 Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation, every sovereign state controls the skies above its territory, a right inherent in global aviation law. No external authority, including the world's preeminent military power, can unilaterally close another state's airspace without consent or mutual agreement. Yet, when a powerful state issues aviation advisories portraying conditions as hazardous, the practical effect can mimic closure. Insurance rates surge, pilot unions protest, and airline risk assessments shift accordingly. In response to these advisories, Venezuelan aviation authorities have pushed back fiercely, accusing foreign powers of economic coercion and framing the situation as a violation of sovereignty that undermines regional integration and cooperation. The net result has been the near emptying of Venezuelan skies, with only a handful of smaller domestic operators attempting to maintain limited routes. Beyond aviation, the naval posture in the Caribbean has introduced tangible operational tension. U.S. destroyers and patrol aircraft have been conducting what are described by Washington as enhanced counter-narcotics operations, targeting suspected drug trafficking vessels in maritime corridors known to be exploited by transnational criminal organizations. These operations have included interdictions at sea, use of airborne radar and electro-optical sensors to track fast-moving craft, and in some reported cases, kinetic strikes against targets assessed to be involved in narcotics smuggling. The legal authority under which these strikes have been conducted, often justified domestically as self-defense or as part of counter-crime operations, has been questioned by international law scholars and neighboring states alike. Colombia, once a staunch security partner to the United States, has publicly suspended certain intelligence sharing arrangements, framing the strikes as violations of sovereignty and an escalation beyond lawful cooperation. The government in Bogotá has stressed the importance of bilateral respect and adherence to international norms as conditions for continued collaboration. Amid these developing military dimensions, the political responses across the region have been vehement. Venezuela's leadership has mobilized national militia forces, a paramilitary structure numbering in the hundreds of thousands on paper, to signal deterrence against what it frames as imperial coercion. Petrostate rhetoric has emphasized resilience against external pressure and appeals to regional multilateral institutions for support. Across Latin America's capitals, from Mexico City to Buenos Aires and Havana, leaders have publicly condemned unilateral military posturing that exceeds customary law enforcement and urged de-escalation. Many have called for renewed dialogue under the auspices of the Organization of American States and other regional forums to forestall a broader politicized confrontation. While these reactions are formidable in diplomatic tone and mass appeal, the military calculus remains fraught with risk. U.S. aircraft involved in patrols, from stealth-capable fighters to long-range reconnaissance jets, operate in proximity to sovereign airspace boundaries. When highly capable platforms, equipped with advanced sensors, electronic warfare suites, and the ability to employ precision munitions, patrol close to contested airspace, the potential for miscalculation escalates. A single incident, such as a misidentified radar contact or an unintended airspace crossing, could escalate rapidly beyond tactical recovery. In the realm of high-stakes aerial operations, rules of engagement and the clarity of command intent are as vital as the platforms employed. Any misstep could be amplified by political posturing on all sides, turning a technical lapse into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Amid this intensifying environment, domestic political currents in the United States, including voices from senior legislators like Senator Bernie Sanders, have injected additional layers of debate into how this crisis is framed internally. While Sanders has no operational control over U.S. military deployments, his long-standing critique of foreign military entanglements and emphasis on domestic spending priorities have reverberated through congressional discussions. Sanders' perspective, rooted in a broader skepticism of open-ended military commitments, has found resonance among constituencies wary of foreign conflicts that stretch strategic focus and fiscal resources. His commentary has underscored a critical point: that military strategy cannot be divorced from democratic accountability, and that the allocation of resources to defense initiatives must be weighed against pressing domestic needs. The economic consequences of the evolving airspace and maritime situation are already measurable. Airlines rerouting around Venezuelan skies incur not only increased fuel expenses, but also cascading costs in crew time, slot allocations at alternate airports, and disrupted passenger itineraries. Cargo carriers face similar challenges, particularly those moving high-value goods across transcontinental routes. These operational disruptions exert upward pressure on freight rates and, by extension, on the cost of goods that depend on timely logistics. Maritime insurance underwriters have also adjusted risk assessments for vessels operating in contested Caribbean corridors, prompting higher premiums that further inflate transportation costs. These economic ripples extend beyond the immediate region, demonstrating how localized strategic tensions can propagate through global supply chains. Strategically, energy markets remain highly sensitive to developments in Venezuela, a nation possessing some of the largest proven crude oil reserves in the world. Sanctions, infrastructure degradation, and production declines have long constrained Venezuela's ability to influence global energy flows. Yet in the current climate of geopolitical friction, any perception of disruption, whether through operational risk to offshore platforms, export terminals, or transit routes, can affect investor sentiment and pricing benchmarks. Venezuela's appeals to OPEC partners for solidarity against external pressure reflect an effort to leverage economic alliances as a counterbalance to military and diplomatic isolation. Mexico's role in this complex tableau merits detailed analysis, particularly given periodic references to its stance in relation to U.S. actions. There is no verified evidence that Mexico has deployed troops against the United States or that it has taken steps to confront U.S. forces militarily. Mexico's strategic priorities remain anchored in internal security, cartel violence mitigation, and economic growth. Nevertheless, Mexico's diplomatic posture has been firm, rejecting external military coercion in the region and reiterating respect for the sovereign rights of all states. In multilateral engagements, Mexican leadership has emphasized the primacy of diplomacy, legal norms, and regional cooperation mechanisms. Given Mexico's significant economic integration with the United States, highlighted by robust trade ties exceeding hundreds of billions of dollars annually, the specter of military misinterpretation carries outsized risks for both countries. Mexican defense forces, while substantial in size and increasingly modernized, are principally oriented toward territorial protection, disaster response, and internal security missions. They do not possess the expeditionary doctrine or force projection capabilities that would support operations outside their territorial ambit against a peer power. These layered developments highlight how crises with military, economic, and political dimensions defy simplistic resolution. The Americas are at a juncture where miscalculation, rhetorical escalation, and competing legal interpretations of airspace and maritime rights could conspire to widen conflict. While governments publicly declare commitments to dialogue and law, uncertainties persist about the next operational move by any of the key actors. Will commercial carriers resume flights once risk thresholds are reassessed? Can multilateral institutions mediate a return to diplomatic channels that reduce military tensions? Will international legal bodies clarify competing claims of sovereignty and the limits of enforcement authority? These questions remain unanswered, and each holds implications not only for the Western Hemisphere, but for global norms governing state conduct. What happens next is far from determined. The strategic posture of naval and air assets, the political narratives from capitals across the region, and the economic consequences for international logistics are all in flux. One thing is certain: the international community's attention will remain fixed on developments in the Caribbean and Latin America as they unfold, and the actions taken in the coming weeks and months will shape regional security for years to come.